guys in the dark.
When I think about my earliest memories, Charlene was present. She was my father's co-worker. She had been there from the beginning. She brought him snacks the day that he announced that my mother happened to be pregnant with me. A few days after I was born, she went into the hospital. I was difficult. It was a C-section. Both my mother and I had to stay in the hospital for a week or so. She had presented my mother with flowers, and me with just a little stuffed toy. I didn't need a babysitter when she was always calling up and offering to babysit me. It would be nice, she had told my parents. You go out, have fun, just the two of you. The baby will be just fine with me. My father happened to be touched by this generosity, but my mother was suspicious about it. She seems just a tad too insistent. Just way too eager to just come into our lives. Of course, it didn't help that she had a visible crush on my father. She never directly crossed the line. It was just giddiness when she had spoken to him. Wide smiles when he had walked into the office. The puppy-like enthusiasm, which she had followed with the events of his life that gave it away. Co-workers would tease him all the time. My father was flattered, but he was a loyal husband. My mother was loathing it. She remembered my birthday every single year, gave me a gift each time that it had come around. I had no memory of any of this. I can't really recall what she had looked like. Not even her voice, or if I enjoyed her presence. I was told that she constantly visited, swinging by the house a few times per week just so that she can say hi. I really don't know exactly, but it had stopped, and what the catalyst was. But by the time that I had entered my first grade, she was a little bit more than the name of a woman that I couldn't remember having met. She was just an entity that frightened my parents, but meant very little to me. She was dangerous, they told me. She wasn't our friend anymore. I really wasn't scared. In those days, at just 7 years old, I only cared about swishing the little skirt on my school uniform, especially when I twirled around, playing with the parachute at recess. You know, having snacks at snack time. My greatest fear was getting to the bottle, pink paint before Stacy. She was the paint monopolizing fingers during art class. So I can't say that our daily checklist of skills particularly alarmed me. Every single morning my parents would pull up in front of the school. They would drop me off and run down the questions. You know, those questions that every single parent asks their kid. What do you do when a stranger tells you that they want you to get in the car? You know the answer. Run away. Go get a grown-up. I had already knew these answers. They were drilled into me. What if they tell you mom or dad had sent them? Tell them that they are lying and then run off and find an adult. What do you do if a woman named Charlene happens to talk to you? I told them, get a teacher. Do you remember what she looks like? I shook my head. Do you remember the hair color? I believe that it was blonde. Yeah, that's right. What do you do if she ever just tries to grab you? Fight. Run to a grown-up that I trust. And so it had gone, every single day, for many years. We lived in a mid-sized city. We were involved in a very small community. My father had worked many hours a day, often many shifts. To climb out of the status many would label the working poor, and to send me to a Catholic school that happened to be private. There was nothing fancy. It was welcoming, and I felt very safe. The education was important to my father. He happened to grow up in a low level of poverty. I truly can't imagine any of that. He worked full-time to help his parents pay the bills. The tuition and expenses were manageable to him, even if it meant he often went to work with holes in his shoes and his pants, or maybe half a sock. It didn't matter to him. Even if he would skip a meal just so that I could get books for school. We never seemed to really get ahead. Private schools happen to be like small towns. Everybody happens to know everyone else's stuff. And this school was no exception. The children were all growing up together. The parents all mingled. They had small talk at birthday parties. We were all attending Sunday Mass. It wasn't very long before information was made out. I've never been sure if it started as a rumor. My parents happened to talk about it privately with all the other parents. And honestly, because of all this, all the parents and the teachers at the school would keep an extra close eye on me, looking after me multiple times during recess. Teachers would go by my classroom on their break, and then they would check up on me and make sure that I was okay. The parents would pass by the school and go to the playground. They would always ask me if I was okay and if anyone had approached me. Nobody ever bothered me. They loved that answer. Mostly I was annoyed at having to answer it every single day, the exact same way, because nothing was happening. My father drove for the city, and as anyone who grew up as a kid of a driver, they can tell you, it's like having an army of aunts and uncles that are not only casually tracking where you are in the city, but they happen to be trusted with your safety. Now, riding a bus might prove dangerous for others, but you happen to be untouchable when you're a kid, sitting in the front, and on a first-name basis with every single driver that is on shift. Much time later, I found out that my father spread the word about her amongst his co-workers. She had gone for another job at this point, still lived in the city nearby. Every driver happened to be on the lookout for her. The school that I was in was one of the bus routes, and every time I saw a bus drive by during recess, I would go up to the fence, and then I would wave at the driver, knowing that it was likely to be my father, or maybe somebody else that he knew. The drivers all had radios so that they could talk back and forth, and every time that they looked at me at school, or out and about, they would just give my father an update on how I was doing. They would let him know if I was doing fine. They would say that he is walking with my mom. Things like that. They would just constantly keep a watchful eye on me. They happened to use a nickname for me. It was because I was a chubby kid. I won't mention it, because it happens to be very embarrassing for me today. I was prone to imitating wrestlers that I happened to see on TV. Those were the dark times of my childhood. I really don't want to talk about any of that. This is also how I got caught trying my first cigarette at the age of 13. One of the drivers happened to see me and my best friend down by our local bodega, taking half-assed drags off of cigarettes and pretending to like it. Right after, they radioed my father. I was grounded before I even got home. It's hard to say when everything began to escalate. I only know that it started with phone calls. My father had come home to find my mom in tears. All day the phone had rang at the house. All day. That's what she had said. He had been at work, and I happened to be at school. She was all alone at the house. The phone would ring, and every single time that she picked it up, there was nothing on the other end. Just terrible, menacing silence. Much later, there was breathing. She happened to be afraid. She was very worried. I wondered what was for dinner. We had changed our phone number right after that. The calls continued, though. Right after, it was time for the school's Halloween carnival. It was my favorite time of year. I was excited to dress up, play all the games, and eat as many caramel apples as I could handle. My mother was eager to be involved in all the schooling. She was an active member of the PTA and the head of Treasury. It was from this fund that the money for the Halloween carnival and many other holiday celebrations had came about. All the parents and teachers donated to make sure that we would have fun on field trips. They enjoyed haunted houses and many age-appropriate Christmas parties. It was a great thing. Then the money happened to go missing. Every single dime. The treasury happened to be wiped out. This happened to be discovered 2 days before the Halloween carnival, when another member went to retrieve some of the money so that they can get some supplies for the children. Scared, they happened to tell my mother, who collapsed, crying. Sure, it was possible a parent or maybe a teacher could have even taken it, but was it really likely? In a school this small, with a community that is so closely put together, and my mother happened to be the head of Treasury. This was targeted, and I knew it. The tension in the school and my house skyrocketed. You couldn't even walk through the hall or even parking lots without finding a group of parents just put together, talking very quietly. The air happened to be shifting. The adults around me suddenly were on their guard. like hunting dogs catching the scent of prey. I was in 3rd grade when the picture happened to arrive. My father had gotten off work early. He went by to pick me up. That was a rare treat on my part. We walked to the front door to find my mom red-faced. She was sobbing, visibly shaking. Before she said anything, my father demanded that I retreat into my room and go and close the door. I cried. He raised his voice at me. Something that rarely ever happened. I ran off to my room pouting. It was a family photo. It was taken at the old Sears photo studio. It was a couple of years ago. My parents and I were just smiling. We were obviously happy. Mom was close to Dad, and I happened to be sitting on my mother's lap, except for her face was scratched out. On the back of the photo, in red marker, it had read, "They shall be mine, bitch." It was like something out of a bad movie. After that, I had my very own guard at school, or rather, one of the school's 2 security guards, who happened to be out wherever I was at the time. The playground at recess, parking lots, everything, even the cafeteria. Things became mostly quiet for a while. Mom was still reported menacing phone calls. She mentioned hearing something walking around our house, crunching of leaves. You know, obvious signs. Later, when Dad had gone to look, there were footprints in the dirt right beneath the window. The day that my mother happened to cry about somebody or something tapping the windows and then jiggling the door handles, my father had set up shop right in front of our front door. Nothing else besides a chair and his rifle. He had dozed off in front of that door all through the night. He was waiting for the first sign. Any kind of sign. He was just waiting for her to make some kind of move, especially when he was home. He was ready for her. He was making sure that she did not harm his wife, or possibly take his little girl. Years later, when I had long been in a full flush of adulthood, he had knocked back a few too many whiskeys. He told me that he considered actually killing her. It was a strike against the woman who happens to be terrorizing the woman that he loves and plotting to steal his child. He put the idea away quickly. He was shameful of it. But still, it had been there. The remnants of it still lingered. After all, we say things like that, especially when it comes to protecting the family. But how many of us will truly do that? It's strange to think it all came to a horrific end over the pettiest of crimes. All of the money from the parents' bowling league treasury was stolen. And then the police arrived at our door, took my mother away in handcuffs. My generation was the first digital natives. At 37 years old, I'm on the older end of the millennial generation. Old enough to remember the days before cell phones and all of that, yet young enough to have never known a life without a personal computer. It's really odd to think this is precisely what has allowed my mother to commit so many crimes without anyone noticing for so long, and later, what would ultimately prove to be her downfall. There were so many factors that led to my childhood being exactly what it was and how it was. We live in a world of constant surveillance. The technology is extraordinary. Fraud detection and all of that. But in the 80s and 90s, there wasn't anything of that sort. At least it wasn't widely available for use. My father, who was a wonderful, protective, and doting father, came out of a horrific background. Abuse that I truly cannot fathom. Alcoholic father, who had tortured his 2 children, weaponized masculinity to immunize them of any influence that might save them. In his words, pussies are the only ones that cry. They're the only ones that will ever need therapy. And we all know what happens to them, don't we? You want something to cry about? I'll give you something to cry about. We all know that an abuser's greatest advantage is teaching his child to ignore the monsters that happen to be under their bed, but to fear the monsters that are in their head. Couple that with growing up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, eras in which it believed PTSD was something that only veterans had to have. If a man was abusive to his children and his wife, it happened to be unfortunate, but it was none of their business. Therapy came with a stigma. It was powerful, and it was essentially social suicide. And you would end up with a loving man riddled with unchecked PTSD, paranoia, and overprotectiveness that comes with it. He trusted her with his child, all of that money that they earned. It didn't occur to him, not once, that it wasn't a great idea. After all, he happened to be grateful that he could escape the hell of his own childhood and make a happy family. Why wouldn't he believe in her? He called the police early, when Charlene seemed determined to torture the family. But given that there happened to be no proof, there wasn't anything that they would do. And later, my mother had begged him not to call once again. They didn't do anything, just like last time. What would be different this time? Besides, our family, my father's family, all believed that handling your problems was the man's duty, and first and foremost. So that's exactly what my father did. Sat in front of the door with a rifle. Wondered if he'd have to kill a woman. He had no idea that everything that was happening was controlling so much of our lives up to this point. It was nothing more than my mother and all of her lies. He had no idea that she was abusing me while he worked 18 plus hours a day just so we could have food on the table. Give her that education that he so desperately wanted for her. His experience with abuse made him vulnerable to everyone who would use that. He had no idea that his wife had not only stolen that money, he brought home and asked her to put it into their savings account. That she had committed so many felonies in his name, tallied up thousands upon thousands of dollars in debt, took money from my school, had various sources of income that he wasn't even aware of. Somehow this wasn't the first time that it was done. I remember my father wasn't around much. It wasn't his fault that he was working so many hours just so that we would have the most of what we could. All my memories of going to the park, getting my toys and playing with them, or being read to sleep, all involve him. He taught me everything I know, like cooking. Showed me how to make chicken soup from scratch, especially when I was sick. He would cuddle me to sleep. He was in all the ways the only parent that I ever had. Sure, she had stayed at home. She raised me. She happened to hate me. Parenting is not for everyone. Even though she was the one that was around all the time, I really have no memory of her ever being with me and playing or reading a book, nor taking me somewhere so that I could build a relationship with her. All I remember is the visible content that she held. That was held for me, actually, whenever I was around. That and her anger. She was very unpredictable. She would fly into a rage. She happened to have a very short fuse. Often it was for no reason. Many times I didn't see it coming, and I couldn't understand it. She screamed and would throw things at me, slapped me in the face. I've long stopped crying about it, or flinch whenever she would move too quickly towards me. If I did something that made her unhappy, she would suddenly tell me that she had cancer. It cleared up the very next day, once she had forgotten all about it. Just to happen next time that I did something, or I said something to her that she wouldn't like. She would leave me in parking lots, a lot of times in grocery stores, just so she could punish me. It was her way of teaching me a lesson, something that wasn't clear to me. She threatened to take me to a priest. She claimed that I was possessed. She would cry when I told her that I didn't want to be slapped by her, and I would beg for her not to. She hid everything from everyone around her. At the end of all of it, she would cry, and she would beg me not to tell my father. So I didn't. My mother happened to have been fired from theft at one of her jobs. Actually, it was the first 3 jobs that she ever had. Many thereafter, though. There was always a break in between. I guess even thieves tend to stop. I found out later that she had taken all of her first husband's savings. Thousands from her brother, her parents, the college fund that my great-aunt had set aside for me. But her greatest achievement occurred during the marriage of my father. Everything included, but we're not limited to identity theft, credit fraud, document forgery, welfare fraud, and many, many more. She was charged with every single one of them. She committed a lot of crimes, especially in my father's name. It took many years and lawyers to sort out everything. He actually feared that he would go to jail over all the debt that was occurred on his name. She had 2 Social Security cards with her at all times. Well, might I say, 2 for each of us, me and her, all with just a couple of different numbers changed. I know that even a single number changed in a Social Security number means an entirely new identity in itself. She had many aliases. People knew her by different names and were oblivious to what her actual family life was. She took out credit cards in my name, especially when I couldn't even walk. As for Charlene, she was nothing more than an innocent woman who happened to have a crush on my father. I'm pretty sure that she was just too eager to have my father's attention. Beyond that, very innocent, unaware of everything that she'd been dragged into, the potential threat to her life, the calls, all the photos, theft, everything that was created by my mother. I'm not sure what for. Maybe to disguise her child abuse. Maybe it was all the theft that she was committing. Or maybe it was just to ward off the woman that somehow she thought was a threat. Honestly, I will never know. They divorced after her arrest, and all the deception began to unravel. My dad was given all custody to me. She spent quite a lot of time in jail. Not nearly as much as you might think. They let her off easier than what she should have, because she was a white woman who had no crimes whatsoever on her record. Plus, a lot of people decided that they weren't going to pursue any damages, or even charge her for any of her misdeeds. Later on, she ended up dating 2 men in succession, right after the divorce with my father. One she almost married. She ended up stealing a lot of money from both of them. Again, she got some jail time. Not as much as you think. She got long hospital stays after faking her illnesses, as was her favorite pastime whenever someone had confronted her about her bullshit. She had borrowed money from coworkers, friends, and family. It was never paid back. This left a trail of angry landlords, loan officers, and casualties in her path of destruction. Finally, she was trumped by technology. She had to change up the routine. She had to settle down quite a bit. Worked a job for a few years. Eventually, she was diagnosed with MS. I find phone calls from collection agencies quite often. She happens to give them my number. Landlords have called me as well, especially because she used my name in the past. Many family friends and friends of hers had loaned her money to pay for a funeral expense for myself. Granted, after all of this, we still speak, while I'm occasionally of 2 minds about it. I got a strong sense of family duty. I value this deeply, but we are definitely not close at all. I don't know if she even realizes this. I visit her once in a while, mostly to make sure that she's being treated well. She plays with my hair, pats me on the cheeks, then calls me baby. Then she talks to any caregiver who will listen about what a wonderful daughter I am, the great job that I happen to have, and what a great job that she did raising me. She refers to me as disabled, a reference to my PTSD. She enjoys the attention from all the nurses and doctors. Later on in life, I asked her if she remembered Charlene. She asked me who that was. I explained everything that supposedly happened with Charlene. She shook her head, said no, I really don't know who that is. She wasn't lying. After all those years and all that bullshit, I can spot her lies. This was true. She lied so much to all those people and perhaps herself. She had forgotten the fundamental myth of her child's early life. Right before her wedding, maternal grandfather pulled my dad aside, told him to be careful around his daughter. She's a liar. He told me that he was stunned. He had no response to this whatsoever. No further context was given about it. Suddenly, my grandfather had changed the subject, continued on like nothing had ever happened. I think about that all the time. She is a liar. You have no idea, Grandpa.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.